ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Walk Show podcast, where we explore the walk of life. This is your host, Walker Neer. On today's episode, we've got Dr. Brianna Gaynor, who runs the practice Peace of Mind Psychology and also has a website, peaceofmindpsychology.com. I discovered Dr. Gaynor on friend of the pod, Culture and Conversations, which is hosted by Jameson Smallwood. He actually had Dr. Gaynor on as a guest within the last month or two. So definitely go check that episode out if you have not. But Dr. Gaynor is out here advocating for mental health and trying to really debunk a lot of the stigmas surrounding mental health and seeking help with it. So I wanted to bring her on today as, you know, obviously on this show we've talked a lot about dealing with grief and how to be more empathetic. Had life coaches on the show, and so I thought that bringing Dr. Gaynor on would really kind of help fill in, you know, some of those gaps in all of that. As always, the music on today's show is provided by Misha Zarin, so thank you very much, Misha. And without further ado, let's get on to the episode. Welcome to the Walk Show podcast, Dr. Brianna Gaynor. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. So, you are a psychologist. Is that correct? Or
correct.
More words? Okay.
I'm a clinical psychologist.
A clinical psychologist. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a website called peaceofmindpsychology.com. And is that also the name of your practice?
Yes.
Okay. And how long have you had that practice open?
It's been 5.5 years now.
Wow, that's a long time. That's good.
Yeah, it's crazy. Every time someone asks me and I say it, I'm like, oh my gosh, wow, it has been for a while.
So, you know, just to kind of introduce you to my listeners, how did you get started in this, or when did you decide you wanted to work in mental health, or maybe even more so, you know, become a psychologist?
So, very simple story, but maybe not so much. So when I was in middle school, people always asked me for advice, and I don't know where I first heard about what a psychologist did or what a therapist did, but I just associated with that, and I was like, oh, I think I'll just be a psychologist. That was as simple as it was. And I kind of continued that desire through high school, and then I went to college, and I had majored in psychology, went to my first psychology class, fell in love with it, and stuck with it. So yeah, it's not really about giving advice at all. So that's not what it's about, but just had that idea in my head since middle school and continued on with it.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty straight line to it then.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, and that you honestly touched on something that I wanted to talk to you about today, so we'll go there. I've recently, in the last year or so, started really on this whole journey of kind of personal development.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that for me was going and seeing a psychologist myself. And I really got a lot of value out of it. She introduced me to the idea of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like what your practice is doing, or I don't know if that's kind of the standard or if there's other ideas or how that all goes.
So there are other ideas. There's several, but cognitive behavioral therapy is probably one of the most popular ones.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's very concrete. You're able to teach it to people, show people the connections, and it also works well with children. Because what it talks about is cognitive, which are your thoughts, your behaviors and your emotions, and how they're all interconnected. And the idea is about how you can change one and it kind of helps to change the other ones, and how addressing each area can really help improve whatever symptoms you're experiencing, whether it be depression, anxiety, behavioral issues. So it can be used across a lot of different areas.
Yeah, so she introduced me to this book called Feeling Good by Dr. David Byrne.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I've read, I don't think I'm all the way through it. It's a dense read, but I just found it to be an incredibly useful and helpful book. And I mean, honestly, something that I thought, you know, even if a person doesn't think that they are suffering from chronic depression or anxiety or something. Like, I just think it's something that maybe everyone should read because there's just tools in it. And it seems like most of the tools that it has to help people, you know, I guess, do the cognitive behavioral therapy, like most of the work that it does really involves kind of writing out thoughts and doing a lot of kind of writing exercises. Is that kind of where you find it, or what kind of exercises do you find useful in that work?
Well, I think I think the biggest thing is really about challenging your thoughts. So
Mm,
thinking about what you're thinking about. We have over 4 million thoughts a day. So there's no way to stop the thoughts from coming, but it's
mhm.
about realizing that you can be in control, not necessarily of the thoughts that come in, but of the thoughts that you allow to stay and linger. And if you can learn to reframe your thoughts and change the negative ones that are leading to a lot of negative emotions and negative behavior, it also helps you to feel better. So just what an important piece that plays just in our lives
Yeah.
overall. hmm
Yeah, that makes sense. So almost, I mean, to some extent, it's kind of being introspective. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. hmm
Um, so something that you had said a few minutes ago, though, was that, when you were a kid, you found that you were good at and enjoyed giving advice, and decided that that was aligned with psychology, only to kind of later find that that's really not what it's about.
hmm
Um, can you elaborate on that a bit? Because that's a common sentiment that I hear as well when talking to people about seeing a counselor or a therapist.
Well, I think it's not, I think, but mental health is not about telling you what to do. It's about guiding you to the places to help you make the best decisions. It's about helping you to discover those things, those challenges, those areas of life which may trip you up, which you may struggle with, helping you process how they affect you and learning different ways to be and function. But it's really about walking you through the process, and it's a collaborative experience versus I'm telling you what to do and you do it. It's really about helping you kind of get to the realization and the understanding and helping you to do the work versus just telling you what to do. Because, you think about it, when someone kind of tells you what to do and gives you all the facts, it's not as satisfying as when you figure it out on your own because then you really have a stake in it. So it's really about guiding more than telling, much more.
Yeah, that's kind of what
hmm
I mean, obviously I'm a layman, so I don't have any expertise in it, but that's
Yeah.
kind of what I've gathered as well, is that I think there's a common sentiment that, like, I think people's picture of what it is to see a counselor or a therapist, or a psychologist, is to go to a room and lay down on a couch and then
Yeah.
tell people about your childhood, and then they tell you the answers or something. And that's just, I don't think at all really what it is.
It isn't.
Um,
Hmm
yeah. But I think that there's, and I don't know where that comes from. I guess maybe television shows or something, or cartoons.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because I think in the 5.5 years I've had my office, I've maybe had someone lay on my couch once. That doesn't mean that people don't lay on the couch. But I think one of the things I do notice is when people walk in, they're like, oh, the couch. So there's this huge perception of what this situation is supposed to be like from television. If you think about it, if you have no prior experience, then what else do you lean on? So you're thinking of a shrink, they're sitting there writing things down, maybe saying, You're just talking about your childhood. Like there's all these preconceived notions about what it is. And therapy is really about working with you on what you need. So what it looks like for me is going to be different from what it looks like for you because it's individualized based on what you're needing and based on what you're going through.
Right. Right. So uh, something that I have encountered. So I have, and I'm not going to name the people. I don't want to put them on blast in that way, but I have some people in my life that struggle with anxiety and depression and those sorts of things. And um, unfortunately, they're in some cases not willing to seek
hmm
professional assistance.
hmm
Um, Mostly because their sentiment is that they've done it before and the person didn't give them the answers, so they don't see the value. And I try to
Yeah.
explain that, like we've just discussed, that's not really the way it works. But so, something I keep coming back to, and something that's really emphasized in that Feeling Good book, is just this idea of being empathetic, um for someone who's going through those sorts of things. But I think as someone who is, again, a friend or family member, and it's not really a caregiver per se, because it's not that invested, but
Mm-hmm.
um, of someone who's going through something like that, it can be so challenging sometimes to understand what it is that you're supposed to say, because it seems like there's a kind of a fine line almost between being empathetic and then also like enabling someone to into behavior. Does that make sense at all? And I mean, do you encounter that?
Where people struggle with what to say to other people who may be struggling.
Yeah, well, and so like if someone's like, oh, the day is terrible because it's cloudy outside today, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like, a natural reaction is like, well, we can't control the weather, so we don't have to be upset because of that. But then, you know, now if let's say I was saying that to someone, well, now I'm doing exactly what the trained person like yourself doesn't do. I'm telling them an answer, and it doesn't work. It ends up, they feel like they need to justify their position, and it never results in them being happier.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the same time, it feels like if you just agree with that sentiment, then you're almost kind of enabling, and maybe enabling is not the right word, but does that make more sense?
Oh yeah, 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 it does. And I think the truth is, with anything, there's not really a always a right way to say things, or you're not always going to get it right. I think about it like when it comes to grief, I think that's probably the area I've realized that people can be the most insensitive. But the
Mm,
truth is, people don't, if you haven't been through it, you don't know what to say, so you don't realize you're being insensitive. So the truth is, you won't always get it right. But one of the things I think is very valuable in that is, well, first of all, kind of knowing the person, right? So there's nothing wrong with saying, well, can't really control the weather, the answer that you gave, and trying to give a different spin. But if
mhm,
you notice that person is negative or that they're struggling, maybe just asking them what they need from you. Because
mm,
sometimes it's about just asking the question. I don't even think people consider that on both sides. But sometimes we just need to let people know what we need from them. And if we
mhm,
don't know what we need, maybe it gives us an opportunity to consider that. But I
mm.
don't think you'll ever always get it right. And if we could take that pressure off ourselves, I think it would make it easier to just communicate with people and just ask simply, what do you need from me? How can I help you?
Right, right. No,
Hmm.
that makes sense. So another thing, I know that, well, I guess another thing that I wanted to get to is, it seems like right now, um, someone seeking mental health treatment is, this is kind of a weird analogy perhaps, but kind of analogous to someone only going to do physical exercise, or taking care of their physical body, if they were going to physical therapy. Like, it's only if they've identified a problem, right? Like,
Hmm.
physical therapy is only when you have a problem. And it
Hmm.
seems like people are only kind of seeking mental health when they think they have a problem. But obviously, when it comes to our physical bodies, we understand, largely at least, that regular exercise and going to the gym or going for a walk or whatever it may be still has a lot of value in it.
Hmm.
Does it seem that is that kind of where you would like to see mental health go, to a place where people are maybe talking with a again, a counselor, a therapist, a psychologist, even if they're not experiencing an acute symptom in that period of time? Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
It does. It does. I think it's twofold. So obviously, if you struggle with symptoms, because what makes something considered a mental health diagnosis is when it starts to affect your functioning. So I'm
Mm,
having anxiety and I'm struggling with sleeping or working. I'm having significant depression and I'm having thoughts of wanting to hurt myself, or I can't engage in the relationships I used to. So when it starts to affect your functioning, that's a mental health diagnosis. And so obviously that's an area where, or a time when, it would be important to seek mental health treatment. But also, just when you're not knowing how to deal with stress, maybe you're struggling with sleeping or not making the best decisions or struggling with a breakup or any of those things where you're still able to function and do the things you need to do, but it's just a harder time in life. And so, what I'd like to see is when people are just having a hard time and not really knowing how to deal with it, they seek out the help, because you don't have to go for years and years, but just like if I have a cold and it lasts maybe more than a week, I'm going to go to the doctor, then why not let that be the same when it comes to mental health, just to get some extra support around whatever's going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so I guess to kind of ask you for a definition, maybe, but so what is the difference between, because I keep using these words interchangeably, but that's probably an error, but what is the difference between like a psychologist or someone who's more of a counselor or a social worker type, or is that all similar?
It's similar. The difference is the degree that you have and also your licensure. So, for instance, a licensed counselor is someone who has a master's degree and counseling, whereas a licensed clinical social worker has their master's degree in clinical social work. So the classes they've had to take can be a little different, as is the program, but across the board, they're all having classes on therapy, on ethics, on working with families and couples versus individuals. But the licensed clinical social worker may have a little bit more training in how to utilize kind of social resources to work with clients. With a psychologist, we have a doctorate degree. So in addition to having those clinical and counseling classes, we have also been trained in how to do psychological evaluations, which is basically an assessment of your functioning to see if there's a diagnosis and then what recommendations you may need. So that's an additional layer when it comes to the psychologist piece, where we can do the psychological testing.
Earlier, I mentioned cognitive behavioral therapy, and you were talking about how that's good for addressing, something like maybe depression or anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
But what about, I don't know if it's fair to say more serious, but maybe diagnoses that maybe people aren't as familiar with, but something like a schizophrenia or that sort of thing. Is that treatable by the same methods, or does that go into a different area at that point?
It does go into a different area and depends on their level of functioning. So, schizophrenia is one of those diagnoses that obviously you are having some kind of perceptual disturbance. So, you are having delusions. So, those are kind of distorted thinking. So you're having ideas of things that may be going on that aren't accurate. So you're not really based in reality. So you're seeing things that aren't there, hearing voices. There are other different hallucinations or different types of hallucinations that can go with that, catatonic behavior. There's a whole slew of things that goes with schizophrenia, but basically it's about your mind not being based in reality. So having a lot of ideas of what's going on, that are actually not going on. And so with schizophrenia, the important thing first and foremost is to be on the right medication, because if you're not, we call it reality testing, where you're aware of what's going on in the here and now. And if you don't have accurate reality testing, then there's not really a lot in terms of therapy that's going to be effective until you're on the right medication. So yeah, there can be different treatment, but something like that, you really need to be on a consistent medication regimen first, and then we can see what your needs are, and based on that, identify what type of interventions or treatment modality would be most appropriate.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that kind of I was going to ask you also about, I mean, and not that I'm trying to pit one against the other, but
yeah,
it sounds like they work in conjunction to some extent. But I was going to ask you about psychiatrists, because that's kind of the other side of the coin, where it's less about therapy and more about different drugs. Maybe, I don't know if drugs is the best word.
Medication.
Yeah, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, different medications. So do you find that, depending on the case, you may refer someone to a psychiatrist if that's maybe the direction it needs to go based on what their symptoms are?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. So I think of medication in a few different ways. There are some diagnoses who, like schizophrenia, which is a great example where medication is needed to function. In other cases, I think of it as, for instance, if a child has just been diagnosed with ADHD, while we know that there are medications for ADHD, there are other things we can do. For instance, in school, we can put in different accommodations to help the child, things we know help children who struggle with symptoms of ADHD. So things like giving them extended times on tests, putting them
Mm,
closer to the teacher so there's less distractions. We can do things like that. There are different nutrition changes that we can make. Um, Making sure that we're keeping them active so they're getting some of that energy out. So there are a lot of different things we can do before medication. So in that case, usually I'm saying if we've done all this and we're still struggling and we need more, we can do medication. Or let's say it's significant. So someone is struggling with thoughts of suicide, or they're about to get kicked out of school, or they're having so many panic attacks that they can't even function, then that's an area where, yes, we need to get some medication because this is an imminent struggle. And in some cases, the medication is long term and sometimes it's short term. So it just kind of depends on the situation. But
mm,
yeah, definitely we refer, but it's not always my first line of defense,
mm-hmm.
but it just kind of depends on what's going on. Most cases, though, it's not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, I definitely have. I had a family member one time who went to a psychiatrist, and they put the family member on several medications all at once, and I was kind of uncomfortable with that. Again, I'm not a doctor, so I don't actually have any credible knowledge on it, but it just seemed like a significant change all at once. And so I asked them, well, what would be the plan for them to go back off of the medications? Like, what does that road look like? And that doctor explained that it was kind of like how if a person wears eyeglasses, their eyes are always, you know, messed up or messed up. I don't mean to say, but, always work in such a way that they need corrective vision. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
that's probably a lifelong condition. And then in this case, it was, chemical imbalances. And so that these medications would probably be lifelong medications uh,
Mm-hmm.
in order to correct those chemical balances.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I've also read and heard some things that some of the research on chemical balances stuff doesn't really hold up. Do you have an opinion on that stuff at all?
Well, I think a lot of things are neurological, so it really depends. Sometimes,
Mm,
um, so for instance, ADHD is neurological in nature. So we do a lot of testing for ADHD, and in a lot of cases, there are different areas of your brain that tend to be affected, and you struggle with more than others. It's not in every case because there are always outliers, but it affects your cognitive functioning. I think the same can be true for depression, for instance,
mm-hmm.
but then it can also be related to significant grief or loss of income or job, so there can be situational too. So I just think it really depends on the person, but I definitely think there is a lot of credibility to the idea that your neurological functioning, your neurotransmitters, and how your brain functions can really affect how you feel as well, because everything in our body is so interconnected.
Sure, sure. Well, that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair that nothing can be painted with a broad brush, right? There's nuance to
Yeah.
to all
Yeah.
situations, so that's
Exactly.
fair. Well, so I was looking on your website,
Hmm.
Peace of Mind Psychology, and um, I saw that you, um, while you're not a I guess a religious psychologist, I think is how you phrased it, or something like that.
Hmm.
You still do have some background with spirituality, and so sometimes if a patient is, seeking that kind of, um, I don't I don't want to say angle, but maybe they want.
Support.
There
I
we
say
go.
support.
Thank you. Um, So can you kind of talk about that, because that's something I think that a lot of people, I'm from Springfield, Missouri, which is considered the Bible Belt of the
Yeah.
United States. And so, well, there's a lot of people who are skeptical of things like psychology because they think that it doesn't align with their faith.
Yeah.
So can you kind of talk about how you've seen those two kind of meld together?
Oh, sure. So so for my program, for my doctoral program, at the end of the 5 years, the fifth year is your internship year. So you are an intern. So
Mm-hmm.
you're learning everything wherever the facility that you've been accepted into, and you're basically full-time staff. And so when I was on internship, I was in Phil Haven, at Phil Haven Hospital, which is in Mount Gretna, Pennsylvania, which probably not a lot of people have heard of. And they had a track that they taught you how to do Christian-based therapy. So that's where I got my training, so how to incorporate that. And I myself am a Christian. So really learning how to incorporate Christianity into therapy was what was really focused on during that year. So I think it's interesting because I think that there are a lot of stigmas related to mental health, related to people just thinking that you have to be crazy or have schizophrenia to go to a therapist. And also when it comes to Christianity, also that maybe mental health therapy is also not the way you should go, because it should just simply be about prayer. And so the way that I've seen it work together for me and for the clients who have come and expressed a desire to have Christian-based therapy is you get to see how God works in different ways. So just like there are doctors that help us with getting better, I think this is just another way that can be utilized, another form of healing. So healing comes in a lot of different ways. And so I think helping clients see that it all works together. So maybe this is a way for you to get your healing, versus it happening instantaneously, because a lot of things in life, I think, are about the process. And we can kind of see that probably if we look over the examples of our life, and that this is just another way at that can really disarm them. But I think that sometimes in churches, mental health is kind of is talked down to as if it doesn't relate with religion or with God. And I just think it's another way to help. And the more you can talk about that, and for me, the more people have seen that I actually have the same beliefs as them, that makes them a little bit more comfortable in coming alongside and being like, okay, this is still something that aligns with my beliefs. And we can still incorporate that while talking about the other things that we can do just to help practically with helping your thoughts and your emotions and all those things.
So, obviously, we're recording this episode here. Today is March 23rd, so we are right in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. Everyone's on lockdown. I know, it's wild.
It is.
But I mean, I had asked you before we were recording today if you were still available, because I know things are crazy for people, and you said that you did want to talk about this stuff today, because maybe now, I don't know if more than ever is right, but now is a very acute time where people are feeling more pressure than they normally would. So do you have any and again, I understand that things are nuanced and everyone's case is unique to them, but are there any kind of best practices that you have for people while they're finding themselves being in these more isolated conditions, especially people that live alone, to kind of help keep their spirits up or keep themselves in a mentally healthy place during
Mhm.
these times?
Mhm. Yes, it's interesting because you do this work a lot and you know what you tell people, but when you're in the situation, so I'll say for me, I've really had to readjust myself to okay, how do I do this? Because I like working from home, but I was not expecting this long stretch of working from home, right?
Right.
So that's different. We all look forward to maybe having a day or two off, but when it's
Mhm.
indefinite, that can be scary. So one of the things I think is important is what is kind of your daily practice for peace, for relaxation, to manage your anxiety just in general. There are so many things going on in the world, particularly related to this pandemic. If you don't have something to ground yourself, it's important that you figure that out. So whether that be praying or religion, or whether it be meditation, whether it be listening to your favorite song, whatever it is that you can do to ground yourself, to make yourself feel good, to kind of escape everything that's going on is important. It's also important that you're aware of what's going on in the world, but don't inundate yourself. I've heard from more people and I've experienced it myself that I can watch the news because I want to know what's going on, but if it's on all day or even longer than an hour, I instantly start to feel anxiety. Like I'm like, oh, it it's almost like a lot of these things are like intentionally trying to create anxiety. So really limiting your exposure because it can make you feel like you have no choices, like this is the end of the world. And just like with a lot of different things, a lot of different illnesses that have happened, this too shall pass. There will be a day when we'll say, I remember when that happened. We don't
Mm.
know when, but just like everything else, things come to an end eventually. It's just a when thing. The other thing I would say is making sure that you're trying to stick to your schedule as much as possible. Um, so for me, one of the things that really helped me to relieve stress before I before this happened was exercise. And
Mm.
so not exercising was really a big deal for me because I was like, okay, I want to stay healthy, I want to feel good, I don't want to sit in the house and just eat all day.
Mhm.
So making sure that I'm exercising or doing something physical, making sure that I'm taking care of my body. And then technology is amazing. So even if you live by yourself, if you're connected to people, make sure you're video chatting with them. Make sure you're looking at people and having those connections, even if you can't have them in person, because that can also make a big difference in not isolating yourself. There's a lot of cool things, like people are doing Netflix parties where you can watch Netflix together. There's a lot of different options that are out now to work through this isolation. So making sure you're taking advantage of those things and
Mhm.
keeping productive too. So making sure you're feeling productive and doing things that you can take off your list to make yourself feel like you are doing something. And then relax, because again, this will be over. So taking time to relax and take care of yourself is going to be important because once work starts back and you're back at the grind, you're going to wish that you had taken advantage of the time to relax.
Sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, so the kind of the themes that I'm hearing from that are having ways to kind of really, and this probably applies even outside of the current circumstance we find ourselves in, but um, having social connections, having something that's a sense of purpose, and I mean, it doesn't have to be that you're gonna take over the world or be the most famous or successful person ever, but just something that you feel proud of or a sense of accomplishment from doing. uh,
Mhm.
and then also relaxing, is that a fair
Mhm.
assessment?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Self care is so, I think, underrated. And we're so used to going, going, going. But there's something to be said for making sure that you're nourishing yourself and taking care of yourself because then you have more energy to do those hard things and to deal with the stresses that inevitably come with life.
Hmm. Yeah, I like I said at the very beginning, I started kind of on this journey of personal development or so within the last, I don't know what it's been, 8 months now, 10 months, I don't know, somewhere in there, not quite a year for sure, but um and that's definitely kind of what I came to understand, was that in order to more consistently feel better, and it's not, a perfect bulwark. I still am subject to being down or being frustrated
Yeah.
or whatever, just like anyone else. But at least to more consistently feel better, I just have to spend some time on a daily basis doing things specifically with the intent that they will make me feel better. Things like journaling and
Mhm.
for me meditating, uh,
Mhm.
but those sorts of things. So that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Mhm.
So,
Oh,
you
and
know,
can I say one more thing I just thought
please
about?
do.
I
Yeah.
think what's important too is how you start your day. So I notice a
Hmm.
huge difference when I start my day with my phone and it's the first thing I'm looking at, and then I'm looking at my feed and I'm looking at this and I'm looking at that, or if I start my day with a sense of peace. So again, it can be meditation, it can be praying, it can just be being quiet and being still. But when I start my day in the quietness and the stillness versus picking up my phone first thing, it makes a huge difference. And I think it sets a precedent for how the rest of the day goes. Either I'm kind of crazed and I'm all over the place, or I'm pretty intentional and I'm able to do things, and things that probably normally would have stressed me out don't. So the way you start your day does set the intention. So be very mindful of how you do that.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad you said that, because
Mm-hmm.
something that I've actually had to kind of relearn. So when I first started my daily routine of things, it was in the morning. Um, but I have the discipline of a 2-year-old when it comes to bed. So I
Yeah.
stay up too late, but I still have to get up at the same time in the morning to go
Yeah.
to work.
Uh-huh.
So I wasn't getting enough sleep, and so I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to start. If I'm not going to go to bed earlier, then I'm going to start sleeping in later in the morning before work, so that way I'm getting more sleep, and I'll just do the routine at a later time in the day. And while I was still doing the routine, I found that it was hard to accomplish all the different steps of the routine that I've got.
Uh-huh.
It was consistent, and I found that to what you just said, I just feel so much better if I do it before I start the rest of my day. And I think part of it's also just kind of it, like for me at least, it kind of gives me a sense of accomplishment, even though I mean,
Uh-huh.
obviously it doesn't pay the bills for me to journal or meditate or go for a walk or something, right? So it's not accomplishment in that kind of way, but it gives me a sense of almost confidence of like, I know that I've already taken time today to work on myself. So
Uh-huh.
now whatever else comes, I'm not going to feel like I'm behind because I've already done that. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So, I've mentioned a few times your website, peaceofmindpsychology.com. Are there resources there that people can check out, or do you have other recommendations for maybe web resources, especially when people are kind of isolated at home now, to learn more about some of these, different therapy ideas or just psychology and mental health in general?
So we do have a resource page, and on that resource page, we have different books and different workbooks that can help with different areas of struggle. So anxiety, depression, those kind of things.
Mhm.
But you bring an interesting point up. I have not updated it with any of these things, just in terms of, especially when it comes to um, the coronavirus and just how to deal with that. There's so much out there.
Mhm.
As we're talking, let me see if I can find a resource, but I think that that will be helpful. So maybe what I'll do is I'll try to update it with some different mental health resources that are going on and update the page so that
Cool.
when people see it, there'll be some additional resources on there.
Yeah, and I'll make sure and include them in your website. Will be in the show notes.
Okay.
Um, So you're based in out of generally the Atlanta, Georgia area, is that correct?
That is correct.
And so, I mean, uh, this may be a silly question, but is it possible for people to work with a psychologist remotely, or is it something where really they need to find someone in their own local area to work with that they can physically go and see?
So right now, one of the things that has been really great is because people are quarantined or at home for the most part, a lot of businesses are closed. A lot of insurance companies have made it a lot more, made telehealth a lot more available. So there are a lot of telehealth sessions going on. So the answer to your question is yes, you can be seen remotely. Um,
Mm,
what tends to happen though is unless the person you're seeing is licensed in your state, you generally need to see someone who is licensed in your state. So, for instance, if you live in Georgia, you want to look for a Georgia counselor, or if it's someone in another state, they need to be licensed or have some kind of privileges to practice in your state. So you don't have to worry about if they have privileges, but it will only be covered if they are licensed in your state. So that's important to make sure of. But
Okay.
in general, most people are doing telehealth for mental health, and there's been a big push for a lot of the insurance companies to lift a lot of their sanctions so that we're able to do it. And it's been great because in the past, I'd say week, a lot of the places who in the beginning of last week were saying no have said yes, and really responding to COVID-19 and trying to make services as accessible as possible.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know that, and something, just a personal anecdote that I'll share that a lot of people may not be aware of. I mean, it's something I didn't take advantage of for several years, but at my day job at a corporation,
Mm-hmm.
um, they actually offer a employee assistance program where
Mm-hmm.
you can call and it's all anonymous. Well, I shouldn't say that it's anonymous. It's all confidential is what I mean to say. So they don't, you can call this hotline and you can talk to someone. And then if you would like to go see a professional, through my work, we actually had an opportunity you could go see a professional for up to 6 sessions, and it was totally free and it was totally covered by, the insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that insurances in different offerings, are not all identical, but my point is just that if someone out there is considering checking something like this out, you might check and see what your employer offers, because that was something that was available to me that I had heard of the employee assistance program, but I didn't fully realize the extent of what the offering was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a great opportunity to be able to go see someone, and not have to worry about, a large out of pocket cost or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of way to explore that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most insurance companies, especially if you're getting insurance through your employer, it's called the EAP program. It's definitely
Mhm.
available. So knowledge is power. A lot of times we have these insurance plans and we really don't know what they offer. So take the
Mhm.
time to call and see what benefits you have. Do I have mental health? You'd be surprised. A lot of this can be paid for or cheaper than you think. And
Mhm.
then you can at least have a chance to try it out and figure out if it could be something that could be helpful.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah. So shout out to Jameson Smallwood and the Culture and Conversation
Yes.
podcast. I heard he had an episode with you, which is how I found out about you. And I was just really moved by the episode you had with him. And, there's a celebrity that I don't know if you're familiar with or not. He goes by Charlemagne the God.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
but he wrote a book within the last year or two called Shook Ones, Anxiety Playing Tricks on Me. Which is all about his experiences with mental health. And he's really advocating that people, not hide it and not feel ashamed of it, and instead go seek the help just like you would if you had a physical ailment. And then
Hmm.
NBA players, Kevin Love, to name one that comes to mind immediately, that's openly discussed his challenges with it. Um, and so I think we're in a place now in society where people from, the celebrity culture and all walks of life are really starting to be more open and promote these ideas. And I felt like that's what you were doing as well. So I was really excited to try and get you on and do my small part to to try and help promote this stuff, because I think there's only upside to it. I don't think there's any risk in seeing a mental health professional. And there's only positive to be gained from it.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I'm so excited that you've reached out too, because my passion is to try to debunk this mental health stigma. And so I do know who Charlemagne the God is. I grew up in New Jersey, so just New
Okay.
York and Wendy Williams and all of that, I'm very aware. And it excites me to hear public people talking about mental health, because I think the more we can do that, the more you see people who look like you or who you admire, who have this platform talk about mental health, the more it normalizes it. And that's what we need, normalizing this as just another thing that can help in life. And a lot more people would be in a lot better places. I'm sure we could all think about family members or friends or just people we know through life who probably had something that they never quite got help for, and it kind of had them stuck. I have several family members who I could name, so really not letting that be our story and being okay with getting help in whatever capacity for whatever you're struggling with is really important. And it's really important message that I just want to continue to get out there. So I'm so grateful that you reached out and that we had this opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Brianna Gaynor, I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for coming on the show today. Again, peaceofmindpsychology.com is the website, and there's great resources there, and she's going to be updating it with even more. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Well, that's going to do it for the show today. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you so much, Dr. Brianna Gaynor, for joining. As always, thank you again to Misha Zarens for providing the music. Again, you can find more information about Dr. Brianna Gaynor's practice and information and just some great resources over at peaceofmindpsychology.com. And that's peace spelled like War and Peace, Peace. We'll also have the link in the show notes so you can find it there. Unrelated to the episode, but if you enjoy The Walk Show and like long-form conversations, I suggest you check out Pick Up Your Sticks, which is a show I co-host with Brett Lindley. Similar to The Walk Show, we have long-form conversations. However, instead of being about all of life like The Walk Show is, it's all about video games and really why gaming matters. So as opposed to just news and reviews, we also talk about just the emotional connections that we have to gaming and why we think it's important. Either way, again, I appreciate the listen. Hope you have a great week. Stay up.